Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Shellcross. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Mark Ainley. Mark, what a great episode!
Yeah, man. This episode we just recorded, I think I don't know, is probably one of the more tense, like me being listening to what the guest is saying and just kind of feeling the energy that was going on when he was describing what he was going through that day. So it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, just unbelievable. And like you hear it, it sounds so fake. And to have it happen to someone we know, and just having him retell it, it was touching, right? Like it was, your skin sticks up a few times. It's like, ooh, or the hair on your skin, I should say, not your skin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we know what it's like to deal with tenants. We know what it's like to deal with the city. We know what it's like to deal with old buildings.
Yeah, this is
But
uncharted water though for me.
this is all that combined times 1,000. It's something that he handled very well, and to hear him how he kind of maneuvered through that day and the following events is awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, let's jump in because we go a little long just because it takes a while to get the whole story out because there's just so much information. So let's jump right in. What's our housing provider tip of the week here?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep my tip along lines with the theme of today's episode. It's just kind of be ready. If you're a housing provider and you do this long enough, you're going to have some sort of hazmat scenario where maybe someone dies in your unit, or you're going to have a fire where you're going to have media come and just be ready for those things. And if anything, know who you have to call that has all the information for you to be ready. Someone like myself or Tom or today's guest.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get him back on here. So for those of you who haven't been with us since the beginning, we're welcoming back Roman Viere from episode 77. But he's the VP of Urban Alternatives, proud member of the NBOA, very active in the community. Anyone looking to do any sort of investment in the Austin area or Northwest Indiana, he has just we're talking 4 digits amounts of units. And we're here today to talk about an event that happened last year. So with that in mind, Roman, welcome back. Roman, welcome back. Good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me back here. I didn't know that you'd actually liked what I had to say last time, so I'm surprised I'm here again.
Well, I like the joke you originally said. Like it takes a giant disastrous fire for me to get back on your podcast.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
So, all right, we got so much to cover here. Let's start the morning of September 20th. You wake up like any other day, and then talk to us. Like we want the play-by-play of what happens from your perspective.
Like you said, it was any other day. I just dropped my daughter off at school downtown, and normally I split my time between my office in Northwest Indiana and Chicago. Just happened to be a Chicago day, and I arrived in the office, and my guy Max, who's like the most important guy on my maintenance team, says, "Hey, we're doing great. We're finally caught up with our turnovers, and we had a major problem with labor through COVID, and we were finally all caught up." And I said, "Hey, Max, slow your roll just a little bit. We're gonna, something weird's gonna happen. We'll have somebody just move out that trash the apartment." I said, I know everything's great, but something can happen. And all the maintenance guys roll out, and my office door is open, and Max sticks his head back in the door and says, "Hey, Roman, just got a call from Francisco. Massive explosion at the West End property." And I just looked at him. I thought he was kidding. And I think I said something unsavory back at him, and he just turned around and walked away. And then I realized it wasn't a joke. I jumped in my car. I didn't have a concept of what that could mean, massive explosion in a building. And this property is about 2.5 miles from my office. So I'm driving up and going down Central Avenue, and I could see the lights from the fire trucks and the police cars as I'm coming down Central, and I get that sinking feeling in my stomach, like this just is not going to be good. And they set up the perimeter really far away from the building, which again was another sign that, wow, this when they set the perimeter so far back, that something odd is going on. I pretty much parked my truck in the middle of the street after I got past the initial yellow tape, and I just walked up. And I remember seeing the first thing I saw, and I'll never forget it, was there was a car parked on Central Avenue in front of the building, completely destroyed. There was just a mass of bricks sitting on top of the thing. And the only point of reference I had to place bricks sitting on top of a car in the middle of the street like that was, some of these images you see coming out of, Iraq or Ukraine or something like that. Just a mass of rubble. Across Central Avenue, there's a building over there, and I saw pieces of window and pieces of building stuck into the siding on the building. And it was crazy because this is a reinforced concrete structure, and even the roof is reinforced concrete, and the front part of the concrete, so the front part of the building, the concrete kind of bent over and was leaning down on the floor below, and fire department has ladders all up and down on the building, and they're running in a partially collapsed building, which just blows my mind, seeing these guys running in without a thought of their own personal safety, just to take care of the victims inside the property.
If
And go ahead.
up until this point, like in your professional career, I mean, you have thousands of units. You've been doing this for, we measure in decades now. Like, have you? What's next? Like, what's something else that like, have you ever had an explosion before? Have you ever had like anything near what you thought you were walking into that day?
I've had fires before. Nothing to this extent. The first building my dad ever bought in 1988, summer before my freshman year of high school. He had a tenant who, it was arson. He ran up the front stairs with lighter fluid and ran down the back stairs and started on fire. That was a pretty devastating fire, but the building was repairable, and I mean, there were people unfortunately hurt, and a couple people actually died in that fire as well. But I just never saw, I'd never seen anything like this, where you just have rubble in the street. You've got, it was in that moment, you can't even feel, you're somewhat numb. You don't really feel fear. You don't really feel, you don't feel panic. You just go into action mode. And that's kind of where I was. It was just like, all right, what next do I have to deal with?
That's a skill set not a lot of people have though too. So you might take that for granted. I know sometimes I take that for granted as well too. But so it's good to have. But as you're rolling up there, is there any thoughts in your head of like what this could be? Is this even my building? Like, I mean, was it the next building? Like, is there any point of reference you had of like what could even possibly have happened? Like at that point?
It was no doubt it was my building. I was really, I mean, the building sits on the corner, and I had no doubt in my mind it was my property. But as far
and that was
as,
because of the damage you could see from where you're at. That's how you have no doubt. Okay.
Yeah. And I think as far as trying to figure out what it was, you just want to, for me, I should say, I was not really as concerned about the why yet, as much as, how do we stabilize the situation? Whatever stabilize means in that moment, right?
Yeah.
I have a bunch of residents who are still running out of the building at that time. I still have firemen all over the place. And, part of, addressing the situation is, who do I call? Who do I notify? And, getting word back to my office, because my office is sitting there blind and they have no idea what's happening. We have a camera system which we can remotely monitor from our office, but as soon as the explosion happened, that went down, right? So they were flying blind completely, and they needed information from me. And that was, I looked at my responsibility in that moment was to make sure that my office had the information they needed in order to address the situation on their side.
Who are we talking to now, right? Like there's police station there. Does DOB show up shortly? Like there's got to be a lot of parties there and a lot of people. Like it's chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like who
So,
did you like once you got there and it starts to settle in, you call the office, but what are some of those other connections that are made, right off the bat?
well, even before I called the office, so I walk around with one of those legal pads in my truck at all times. First thing I do is identify who is in charge of the scene, and it's somebody from the fire department, and they want my name, I want their name. They want to know if I've insured. They want to get a list of tenants who live in the building. I'm trying to identify what parties are in charge, and I'm trying to get everybody's name on that legal pad because it's going to be necessary at some point. So immediately after I identify who's there, they tell me where I can stand. So I stand back into the area they deem safe in that moment. And then my first call after that was to call my office, let them know what's going on, and let them understand that this is a major event. This is not something minor, and that I'll get back to them as quickly as possible. My second call was to my dad, who was actually traveling that day, and I got a hold of him in O'Hare Airport about to check his bag in, and he just said, "Well, do I need to come back?" And I'm like, "Yeah, this is when you need to come back." So he came back. My third call was to my public adjuster, and we can talk about this in a little further into this interview, but the public adjuster, he has all the connections that you need and can guide you through these sort of things. He's dealt with them before. I've never dealt with anything on this scale before. Then I called my PR guy, who's actually isn't my PR guy. He's the NBOA's PR guy that I've been working with for years. And I asked him if he'd be willing to take on the case. And luckily he did. He gave me a set of guidelines to follow as far as how to deal with the media. First thing was to identify a point person in our company, and it has to be the same person. You don't want to be jumping around. The second thing is we wanted to put out a press statement, just basically acknowledging that we're aware of the situation, that we're on site, and that we'll have more details to come. And then the next thing is to instruct our office. He told me to instruct my office that any media outlet that calls, let them know that we do want to talk to them. The owner's on site dealing with the situation at hand, and get their name and phone number, and somebody will call them back. This way, they know that you're engaged, and you're not ignoring them. When they call the office, we get the information. They then give that information to our PR guy, Mick Snyder with Sphere Consulting. You actually had him on an episode, I believe.
Episode for those, just real quick, 204, and it's just, I know you never plan to be in this situation, but it's a great playbook. It's great advice just to make life as easy as possible in a situation like this. So if you haven't listened to that one, not promoting the podcast, do it for your own good. Like, go back and listen to it.
And so, Mick was able to call them up and say, "Hey, I'm their PR consultant. What questions do you have?" So then Mick was able to give me a call back, and we know what questions there are. And with those questions, we are able to have a response and not look like complete morons on camera when we do get in front of the news cameras. It's not about creating a false narrative. We want to be honest with everybody around us. But, one of the things that they brought up was, hey, you had 7 failed building inspections. I don't want to be flat-footed on that. Well, I was able to call my office and say, hey, we had 7 building inspections, look it up. And we're really good at our office at scanning everything in. So all they have to do is a few clicks. We know what the violations were. And I think more than half of them were building code, trash violations. So I can really easily go through them. And then we were also able to identify that we'd resolved all of those issues. the city of Chicago isn't really good about updating their website about when there is an inspection violation, then that those things have been resolved. And, you know, I can report back to them, hey, look, everything's been taken care of. None of them are anything that would have caused this incident. And I think at towards the later end of the first day of reporting, they started saying that none of these violations would have caused what happened today.
Yeah, and I'll comment real quickly because I remember talking to you maybe the day after, you know, right around when this was fresh, and I remember just being angry because the first sets that come out, it's all evil landlord, right? It's all negligent. It makes,
The witch hunt.
and then the narrative just, oh, sorry, we misreported. There's like no, if you don't take this stand, you don't protect yourself, they're just going to pound on you whether the facts are true or not, right? So like
No.
I took that very, you're the one in the situation handling it, but I remember just being pissed off at like, oh, you're just guilty till you prove yourself innocent at all times, and it's unfortunately that's the world we live in.
Right. It's, we've all seen some landlord on the news. I remember when those porches collapsed in Lincoln Park, and, the first thought is for those people who died in that incident. And then you start thinking that poor landlord, he probably built it to the code, which I can't remember, but I think it was built to the code, but the code wasn't substantial enough for the type of use they had in place. And, it's one of those things where it's really easy to find yourself on the wrong side of that thing. And that's why, I wanted to address it and come out in front of it rather than, come from behind and try and correct the record after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you kind of alluded to it. You had those documents ready to go. Let's circle back to some of the other preventative measurements. So I think you spoke at John Warren's meetup or one of the local meetups here, and just gave a ton of great advice on all the things you guys do on just a daily basis, a weekly basis. So when something like this happens, you are prepared. And I think this goes highly unnoticed because it doesn't show up on your spreadsheet. No one talks about it when they're purchasing a building. It's not sexy. But just talk us through some of that, because I was actually shocked of all the different steps and all the different things you guys do with smoke detectors and fire extinguishers and incident reports and the training you have.
Yeah, the first most important thing is you have to know the condition of your property. And I think part of the reason earlier on, we were talking about having a sense of, dealing with the situation at hand, is it's easier to deal with that if you know your ducks are in a row, right? So when we go do our inspections, we used to do an inspection twice a year, every 6 months. We just didn't feel that was enough. So we do it every 4 months now. 3 times a year, we go through every single unit. We check all the smoke detectors. We have the 10-year sealed batteries now that we're required to have, but we're not required to replace those until those smoke detectors have expired or they've or they're based out of their usable life. So we're checking to make sure the batteries still work in the ones that are still the old school battery ones. We check the fire extinguishers. Now, I don't know if we're actually even required to have fire extinguishers, but we had an insurance company that asked us to do it, so we just do it across the entire portfolio now. Just make sure that those are charged. We make sure that we keep up on who's living in the units. And let me tell you, that's really critical. And I didn't realize how critical that would be until the day of this particular event. They're trying to identify that everybody was out of that building. We had a partially collapsed structure there. And they wanted to know, do we continue digging in this partially collapsed structure, or is everybody accounted for? So if you don't actually know who's living in your units, you might be putting the fire department's life, the members, in jeopardy if they're rooting around in a building looking for somebody that they don't know may or may not be there. And making sure that you have a good set of photographs of your units. We do photographs at every unit turn, new set of photographs. We know what they look like. We know what things we have in there, what we don't have in there, and that helps you when you're trying to recreate what the unit looked like prior to an incident, as to what type of appliances you might have in there. And we actually, inside Appfolio, which is our management program, we have a fixed assets part, and we're not completely filled out on every appliance from every unit, but we try when we do service a unit to include that information, which actually helps in other ways as well. If a resident calls up and says, I need a new shelf for a refrigerator, I can look up the model number and order it, have it shipped directly to them rather than having to go out there, get the model number, or come back and order it. So, and then the camera system, we put up a camera system. We put them in, not at all of our buildings, but we try and put them in at least our larger buildings. And that was really helpful for us in dealing with the lawsuit side of things for the personal injury side. There was one of the residents reported that he was coming in the main entry door when the explosion happened, and he was being showered down by bricks, I think was what he stated. When we looked at the camera system, there was no one near the front door when that happened. So being able to document things like that on video is so valuable. You having in place a system for your incident reports as well, that's crucial, so that you can document how you handle things, and that if you just something as simple as a trip and fall, if somebody says that the carpet was in disrepair, and how quickly you've responded to that, when the incident was reported to when it got repaired, all those sort of things. Training your employees on crisis, how to use a fire extinguisher. I mean, we think it's a pretty basic thing, but so many people have never actually had to use a fire extinguisher. I actually had a fire a couple of years ago where my maintenance guy was in the unit below. It was a vacant unit, using the bathroom, and he heard all sorts of noise in the unit above, and he went up there, and he could smell the smoke, and there were kids in the unit by themselves. They were young kids. Parents had left them alone. The kids started the fire accidentally. He was able to get the kids out of the unit, and I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, but he closed the door behind him when he left. The fire department identified that simple act of closing the door behind him would basically save that entire tier of that entire entryway of 6 apartments. That's how intense that fire was. And just being able to teach your maintenance staff, simple measures such as closing a door in the event of a fire can go a long way to reducing the overall issue. And then, knowing your city officials for me was really important in this situation. The alderman's ward superintendent, he was the second person who called me regarding that. He said, I think you have a problem at your building. The alderman, they got him at City Hall, and they were interviewing him the morning of the event before they were interviewing me. And he did not have such a positive interview for me. He didn't know it was me. He didn't know my building, but his ward sup did. His ward superintendent reached out to him. He actually, apologized, not understanding that it was my building and somebody who actually was a good housing provider in the neighborhood. The police department, I know a lot of the 15th district police officers, they were on site. They were very helpful. And the department buildings. Now, I'll say this, in a really horrific event, having all those people on your side is massive. And I don't normally compliment the city on their competence, but the city did such a good job in this particular situation. There's not one single thing I can say that they did wrong. They were so supportive, so helpful. The Department of Buildings, the deputy commissioner for the Department of Buildings, Marlene Hopkins, was out there. Now, I've met her a number of times before, but never in a capacity where she could really make my life miserable. And she was so helpful throughout the entire process. And at the end of the day, she was there, she got there about 9:30. She left at about 9 o'clock at night, and I stayed till about 11. When she was leaving at 9 o'clock at night, I said, Deputy Commissioner Hopkins, I gotta tell you, I appreciate everything you guys did. You're so supportive, and I couldn't ask for anything more. I told her, I said, I'm normally really afraid of you guys, but here you came through strong. She said, it's really simple. You came and did what you had to do. I'm not going to get in your way doing what you have to do. And normally we arrive at these sites and we can't even identify who the owner is. You were standing here, so we didn't have to make things difficult for you. And being present in your properties, and not just in crisis situations, in all situations, makes everything a lot more easy.
Going back to arriving on scene, how many units is this building?
There's 35 units.
You mentioned knowing your people, like how you're probably able to get a list from your office pretty quickly. Like how did I'm picturing such a chaotic situation. How do you even like checklist off like this person's here? Like how'd they take that count and how long did that take?
So I reached out to the office, had them go into, AppFolio is such a fantastic program because you can go into each individual unit. You can see who the responsible members are, meaning those who are responsible for paying rent and those who are just occupants in the unit. You can just pull it up real quickly. And I could just give I didn't have a computer printout, but I was able to get a PDF and I was able to shoot a PDF straight to the fire department. I spent a number of years ago, I spent quite a bit of money having somebody do drawings of all the units for marketing purposes, but it gave overall layouts of the buildings and everything. I was able to send that to the fire department, which allowed them to more safely address the situation. So just having, last time I was on your show, I was touting the necessity of having a good property management software, and I'm sure they all work similarly. I can only speak to AppFolio. But I know Yardi is a fantastic system. I know Rent Manager is as well, and I'm sure it has all the same capabilities. But just being able to pull that list down and being able to filter through is just, it's magical almost.
So they took the toll on, or they took the kind of checklist on how was there, like how long did that take? Did that take hours, or is that like something that happened pretty quick after the event?
You know what? This is something, again, it's amazing to watch the fire department work because they've been through it. They train for this stuff. They have a checklist. They know somehow they've already went through, how many units are in the building. They already knew the numbering system of the building, and they took names. I mean, it was stunning to see how accurate they had their information as far as who lived in what unit and who was accounted for. And pairing that up with my list, I don't think it took them more than, I think maybe an hour and a half on the long end, just because there were some people at work that they had to get a hold of, but they accounted for 90% of the people within the first 45 minutes.
It's building ordinance to make sure you have your units labeled. I know as property managers, sometimes we have owners like, well, I'd have to pay this few bucks to go have the unit put on the front of the door. And it ends up being for multiple simple reasons, but then also in this case, if you had a whole hallway where things weren't clearly labeled, like that could really screw up or put people at risk in a situation like this. So side note here, make sure your units are labeled.
Yeah. And we went through the expense of having little placards made and screw those to the doors. But I mean, you could just buy a stencil and a Sharpie and just fill it in and put the numbers on there. It is, I mean, and not just for the fire department, but I mean, like you send a maintenance guy out who's not familiar with the building, he's going to walk into the wrong apartment.
Vendors,
So,
yeah. You said you were there till 11 o'clock at night. Talk to us about kind of that day as that day went on. What did that in hindsight, did that day go by fast? I mean, it sounds like a long day. Like who you're talking to? Did you have to deal with families? Like tell us a little bit about that.
I'll equate it to being a parent, right? Everything goes by so fast, but if you look at the whole thing, but moment by moment is excruciatingly slow, right? So I think about my kids, and it seems, I look back at how quickly they've grown up. But if I think about when that kid was waking up in the middle of the night, not sleeping, how brutal that was. But like I said, I gave you the people that I called and pretty much in the orders, and I called it. The one phone call I forgot to mention that was probably the hardest call to make was calling my wife. And when I called her up, actually, she sent me a text message first. She was in a conference and she got an alert from the Chicago Tribune and said, "Hey, don't we have a property that's on West End? This isn't you, is it?" And my response to her is, "Yep,
maybe."
And she's like, maybe you should call me with the text back. so, so I called her up and I'm like, if you get any calls from media, don't answer it. Just don't answer your phone, period. And she actually really was getting phone calls from media. I don't know how they triangulated that she was, I mean, they got her number based on our ownership of the property. And they were trying to get information from her. They let out, they didn't dig after the first couple of hours.
They called me.
Did they really?
Yeah, they called me based on the YouTube clips we had from the previous episode. They literally called me asking me what I know about you, what kind of how like it was, I think it was Fox News if I remember correctly. They literally called me. I got like on the way home, I saw a voicemail from earlier that day.
Wow. Crazy. They're working any lead they can. But I'll tell you, my wife, she works for AbbVie, and they were fantastic. They actually they let her go from the conference, and because she was supposed to be there all day. I had kid duty that night, and they were massively awesome in helping out and very supportive of her. Crazy, I didn't even think about what I was going to do with the kids. Like that was so far away from where I was in the moment, but it did help. I asked, so I had to be on my phone constantly. So I had Max, the first guy, to notify me of the situation. Let's video as much as we can. Let's, just make sure that we have as much data as we have on the situation. And he was videoing with his phone. I tried to maintain a running narrative. At some point, you kind of lose track of it, but it's really important that you have a running narrative of the sequence of events and who you talk to. And the moment that I had anytime I had a free moment, I would try and go back to my narrative and fill in other things. We're saying I was at the site till 11 o'clock. When I got back to my office, it was like 11:15. I sat down in my office, went over my narrative to make sure I didn't miss anything. So that was, that didn't take much time, but it felt like hours, decades. And then I got the phone call from Mick about going on camera. And that was the oh crap moment for me, where like I hadn't really thought about going on camera, but then I realized in that moment, this is going to happen. And everything goes through your mind. Like I didn't get my hair cut in the last 3 weeks. I look like a moron. What am I wearing? But then one of the things to remember when you do engage with an accredited PR consultant is they do have relationships with these with the media folks, and those people in the media do not want to burn that relationship. So they'll generally stick to the questions that they talk to the PR guy about, unless you give them an opening. And the PR guy, Mick, made sure he gave me ways to answer the questions in not giving them openings to dig in and find more problems for them to pry into. And the other really valuable thing he said about going on camera is before you speak, just give yourself a couple seconds. You don't have to speak right away. Allow the question to hit and allow yourself to formulate, then give your response. If you try and answer too quickly, sometimes things come out of your mouth that you didn't really intend to come out of your mouth, and you may actually be misinforming them because you didn't hear the question correctly. And if you give yourself that second, you may go, hey, did I hear that? Can you repeat the question? And there's nothing wrong with asking them to repeat the question. You want to make sure you're accurate because you don't want to look like a moron on camera. And all the interviews I had, they were fair. They were asking the questions they had to ask. The one we were talking earlier about asking about the building code violations. I feel they all had to ask that question because they knew the other guys were going to, and they were going to look like they weren't doing their job by not asking me those questions. So I was, at first I was a little upset, but then I thought, Mick talked me through it. He goes, they have to ask these questions. And once I understood that, I was okay with it, and I was able to deal with it a little bit better.
All
I
right.
think the next thing that I got that really gave me this was when I really understood this was a unique event. I already knew it was a unique event, but if I was, there's one moment when I thought to myself, oh man, this is so different, is when I saw ATF roll up. And when the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms come walking down the street, and they have a strut, and they have a way of letting you know that they're in charge. That's when you get that full sphincter clinch, like, oh, this is not good. And they, I'd never talked to anybody ATF, so I can't really speak about their demeanor at all, but they definitely made me feel concerned.
What
I
part
should
of the
say.
event triggered them to come in?
Well, it was a massive explosion, so they wanted to know what the cause was and whether it was. I think it was such a big explosion that they wanted to make sure it wasn't a terrorist event. And so, and the way it was explained to me was the gas had to be on in that unit for a really, really, really long time, in order to build up enough energy to create that kind of explosion. And so the question is, was it intentional? Was it accidental? Who's responsible for it? And and they had to do their investigation.
And the last thing you want it to be is terrorist, because I'm sure you signed the waiver that you'll waive any terrorist acts on your insurance policy. That one waiver.
I'll tell you, I do have a couple buildings with institutional debt that have terrorism requirements on coverage. This particular building didn't, so there was definitely a concern of that. Something I thought about quite a bit as we're going through it. Yeah, it's interesting you picked up on that.
So let's talk about just some of the tactical things that happen throughout the day. So, it's getting towards nighttime. You do the interview, but are you boarding up the building at this place? Where are the tenants going? Like, is Red Cross involved? Like, some of those tactical things that get lost in the matter. Like, what happened to the tenants? What
Yeah,
happens to the
70
actual
people or so.
physical part of the building that's still not collapsed?
So, I'll actually start before you're dealing with the tenants. I started dealing with my employees. They need to know how to respond, right? Because I can't respond to every single one of those residents. Plus, we have hundreds other units in the area, and you're going to have issues. They're going to have questions as well. We're all over the news. So getting information out to all of our employees, letting them know what's going on and how we're addressing the situation is first.
And Roman, how many employees do you have, just for our listeners?
We have 25. We have 25 employees. So making sure that all of our employees are aware of and apprised of what's going on and how we're going to address it. Making sure that I stay calm, because they're going to be a reflection of me. If I'm running around looking like a chicken with his head cut off, they're going to run around the same way. So I think I was already calm, but whatever part of me that wasn't, I was trying to suppress that and make sure that I presented that to them. Now, dealing with the customers, my sister Lenore in the office, her and Fran, they did a fantastic job. We immediately we knew that nobody was going to be able to be in the building that night. We didn't know if they would ever be able to get back in the building, period. And we immediately started working on trying to find permanent housing for them, because we knew we had a sense that they weren't going to be able to go back in. And Red Cross was there, but we identified a bunch of vacant units that we had. And so of the units that were occupied, I'm going to just look back at my notes here because I want to make sure I get the information correct. But we had 35 units. I think 31 of the units were occupied at that time. So we were able to find housing for 17 units inside our own portfolio to make sure, we were able to get them in there. And there was Dwayne Ayersman, who's also a housing provider on the west side. He was able to get 7 others housed. And then Tom Martin was able to get another 4 or 5 of them. Basically, everybody was had a place to go that night, except for one gentleman. He was housed by the Red Cross at the Circle Rock Ministries church down the street. And the other people who didn't fall within those numbers I gave, they chose to be with family, and not in one of our buildings that we provided for them. But you know, I have to credit the community in stepping up right away. You know, I got phone calls from Tom and Dwayne immediately after saying, "Hey, if you need any help, let me know. But we have units to help you out with." They gave discounts on the rent so that they could afford to be in. I mean, a lot of these residents, this building, I've owned this building for 25 years. And these residents had old rents. I mean, we did raise them a little over the years, but not, they weren't at market by any means. So making rent adjustments so that they could afford where they were going was something that they helped with. The Red Cross came out and gave them all gift cards. We issued, I think it was the same day, it was the next day, we gave them all of the rent back for the month of September, whatever they had. And we didn't have any security deposits, so we didn't have that to give back to them, but we wanted to make sure that they had money to be able to navigate with. Most of these people, everything they own were inside the units. Some of them didn't even have bank accounts. So yeah, we mobilized really quick to take care of that, and get them in a safe place.
Some of these residents, everything they have in their life was in these units. Were they able to eventually get back in? Did somebody specialists have to go in and get all their stuff out? Like, how did that work?
So helping the residents get their stuff out was, what we did is we were really concerned about the possessions that they had. And we actually, so I'll take a step back before we go forward. Tom asked about boarding up, and we did board up. It was one of the things that we did really early on. I sent my staff out to go buy a bunch of plywood. You know, having these board up services board up your buildings is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they charge you per sheet, and they use 2 for 1 window. It's crazy. So we went and we bought a bunch of our own stuff. And what was helpful is, I can't remember the details, you know, this is why you get a public adjuster, but he said, you know, after you get above a certain height, you can board up from the inside. You don't have to board up from the outside. So that's helpful, because you can go inside and board up those windows from the inside. We then, this is where my relationship with the 15th district helped out. They provided police officers that first night to sit on site to make sure that nobody was going in the property. The Department of Water Management, they sent out massive trucks with lights on them. So it was lit up like Wrigley Field on August 8th, 1988. And made sure that everything was secure. After the first night, I had an armed guard sitting on the property, making sure that nobody was getting in. We then went and we scheduled our residents time slots to come and get, so the incident happened, I believe, on a Tuesday. We weren't able to get them access into the units until Thursday, but we gave them time slots to come in Thursday just to grab basics that they needed out of their unit. And they had to be escorted in with an employee. And that's because everybody's unit was kicked in from the fire department. We didn't want anybody wandering through the building. We wanted to make sure that they had somebody watching them, making sure they were only going to their unit. And so we gave them an initial pass, and then the week following, we gave them bigger windows to actually come out and remove everything else that they wanted to remove from the units. And that was crucial in allowing them to recover whatever items that they had.
All right. And for those of you watching us on YouTube, you probably wondered why we all just had outfit changes. We actually ran out of time. So we had to come back and record this in 2 separate segments. So here we are in our new Dress to Impress clothing for you. But Roman, so let's talk after the day of the event. What happens to the actual building? Like, you get it boarded up, but like, what happens to the stuff you have in there? What happens? How do you sell it? Like, just talk us through the next steps there.
Well, we identified at some point that the building was, we were either going to sell it or, we weren't going to continue with the property as is. So we start going through the property, and this was a building that we used as an offsite storage facility for our, a lot of the extra stuff, wheelbarrows, plumbing supplies, whatnot. So we wanted to make sure we got all that stuff out. We salvaged what we could. We put in some new kitchens over the last couple of years. So we saved the cabinets. Pretty important was when we saved the appliances and cabinets and stuff, we removed it from the building. We didn't know how the insurance company was going to deal with it. We didn't know how big the loss was going to be at the time. So we made sure to inventory all that stuff so that we could, if we had to actually then buy it, we could bill it to the individual buildings that we sold it to. And that was a little extra bookkeeping. They didn't actually end up needing it, but we were safe and we were covered in case we had to. We pulled all of our lock systems off. We actually had a fob system on that building, which they're pretty expensive. Basically, the control boxes that operate the mag locks are really expensive. So we had salvaged all that stuff and repurposed it. So whatever we felt that we could reuse later, we took out. And then
did you go after the copper? Did you go scrap the copper and stuff?
Actually, we actually thought about that because we do have a lot of 2-inch copper in there, but we left it in there. We just felt it wasn't worth the effort to pull it out, the expense. Oddly enough, we'll get into it in a little bit, but nobody ever actually broke into the building in the time that after the incident. So the people who have the building now actually have all this beautiful copper in there. So we got all that stuff out. We were prepared for whatever we were going to have to do with the property. I tried to actually donate the property to a non-for-profit that was going to bring it to market with some affordable housing. They were struggling finding a contractor partner that met the city standards, and in the last minute, I had no choice but to sell it. Luckily, Jack Hassan, who sells a lot of stuff in the Austin neighborhood, was actually the listing agent on the property next door. And he calls me up one day and says, "Hey, I had another walkthrough. People keep asking about your building. I don't know why, but do you want to sell it?" And for me, I wasn't looking to make any money on that. I really wanted to make sure it went somewhere where somebody could actually do something with the property and make it an asset again for the community. And what I told Jack was, whatever you get, I just don't want to have to pay anything at closing. And he got me a little bit more than that, which was nice. And I think the weird story that came out of the whole thing was we closed without a water cert, and so we actually escrowed, I think it was like $30,000 just in case there was a huge water bill. And so we closed. City had came out and done the meter reading before closing. We just kept logging in every day to our water account with the Department of Water. And then when the number finally came up online, we owed $1,078,000. It was an absolute scary moment, but we spent about the next 6 hours trying to research and figure out, how the heck that was.
Who's the first call there? Like, you just calling the 312 number? Like, what happens?
Yeah. No, well, we wanted to make sure we had all of our ducks in a row before we made the phone call. So we spent the next 6 hours just researching, trying to figure out where this came from. Because the day of the incident, I mean, I could see water flowing out, but that was only a 3/4 inch pipe, and it ran for maybe 9 hours. And we got this window we're able to run in there. And the first thing I did was shut the water off. My mind is the water thing drove me nuts. And so we did all this research, and we saw somewhere a couple of years ago, and again, this is where Appfolio became fantastic, where there was a work order in because they wanted to come out, the water department wanted to come out and change meters. And so our assumption was that they maybe changed the meter, but didn't record the actual meter reading that they changed it with. And there was estimated meter readings from the date that they changed the meter until we got that final meter reading. Spent a ton of time researching this. When my dad actually called the Department of Water, first off, he had to sit on hold for a couple hours, which was really annoying. But when he got on, he gave the person the account number and said he was calling regarding the account. I typed in the number. He goes, "Oh, it looks like you have $130 credit." My dad's like, "Well, just make sure you send it to the right address," and got off as quick as possible in case they made another mistake. So yeah, it was definitely a scary moment trying to figure out how we're going to come up with $1 million to pay for a water bill, but luckily not something we actually had to worry about.
Dude, I find it so funny that when you start referring to that building as being a place you used to keep your supplies in, the first thing you say is a wheelbarrow. I don't know why, that made me like one time, one of the only properties I ever owned on the west side is more like Lawndale, but landscapers are there, and I got to the property and they're complaining that someone from the neighborhood just stole their wheelbarrow. And I whatever, it is what it is, man. It's where you shouldn't leave it out front, man. That was stupid. Like, so as I leave, I go heading back to 290. I go down Pulaski, and on Pulaski is two, I would say probably teenagers. One's like in the wheelbarrow, and the other one's holding and running down the middle of the street in Pulaski. But either way, I found that funny. But on a serious note, what was the time frame of that? So from the time of the incident to the day you closed with Jack, like what are we talking, months? Are we talking weeks?
It was almost a year. So the incident, I believe, was September 20th. We sold the property on September 2nd the following year. And it was really important because I just didn't want to have to re-up the insurance. And we closed just in time, and we were good.
So tell me more about that. Like, what happened with the insurance afterwards? Like, it now becomes like a construction site or a potential collapse. Like, what happened with your insurance premium after that? After the day to stay insured, I guess.
That and, does it affect your other buildings, right?
Right. So we had just a couple weeks prior to the incident re-upped our insurance for the next year. Luckily, so everything was in place. We did get a notice a couple months into it of a non-renewal, and we had it under a portfolio policy. But they couldn't just cut me off in the middle of the term. So we were okay through that year. It was a little tricky because we were working on the settlement with the insurance company. We just didn't know how this was all going to shake out. So we weren't really happy with the brokers we had. We hadn't been happy for a couple of years. And so we went shopping for a new broker, probably at the worst time to be shopping for a new broker, when we had a massive loss. And insurance rates have gone up 25% for most people in the last year. The first guy we went to, he came back and it was absolutely stunning. Double the premium with $1 million deductible. And we were beside ourselves, like we don't know what we're going to do here. And we spent a lot of time working on we found a couple different agents. I actually ended up working with State Farm. I didn't realize State Farm worked on buildings this large.
Yeah.
And now everybody had basically a 25% increase in their premium. State Farm was slightly higher than what I'd been paying the previous year. Now I had to peel out the properties that I'd had recent claims on. So that particular property, we'd sold it, not an issue. But that property is owned in an LLC with 4 other buildings, so I had to get different insurance for that. But I was stunned that State Farm actually was able to write that policy. There's a couple other issues I had with a couple of the buildings, but we ended up with roughly the same premium we had the year before. But trust me, there were a couple sleepless nights. We actually got forced placed by our mortgage holders on a couple buildings, which is not a pleasant situation to be in, because I think it's a violation of your mortgage agreement. They can foreclose, whatever. But that was just for a short period of time. But we're all good now.
This building, did this have a lien on it, or was this free and clear, the one that burned?
We owned it free and clear. We actually about 2 or 3 years ago. So CIC, a lot of these commercial loans, right? They're 25-year loans, but they're amortized over a 30-year period. And so a couple of years ago, we caught up to that 25-year point, and rather than put new debt on top of the building, we just paid off the remaining portion, and we own that one free and clear, which was nice.
Got it. Because that would have been a different game too. Because now the lien holders got to get paid off at the settlement, right? There's probably a little bit more complications had you had debt on it.
Right. And it also made a lot of decisions we made a lot easier. Like, earlier we were talking about refunding rent to the tenants, and a lot of decisions that we made were made easier because I did have a bigger portfolio that I can lean on. This wasn't my only source of income. When the insurance company gave us their first offer settlement, it literally was less than half of what the final offer settlement was. And that was, I mentioned Greg Yearwood at Precision Consulting, who was my public adjuster. He's the one who made the difference in that. But I might have, if I was in a bind, I might have just jumped at that half offer because I needed the money. So we were actually in a very fortunate situation compared to somebody else who may have just had 2-3 buildings.
Let me ask this question: from the time they made that first offer to the time your person negotiated that what you said was double, how long was that? Because you said a lot of people get strapped for times, so maybe people understanding what that time frame looks like could help.
It was probably about 3 months. Okay. There was a lot of back and forth about how they arrived at their number. There was actually, and I don't know, you guys might know a little bit more about it. There's that last little bit of money that's always left over on these claims for depreciation, and I don't exactly know how they come up with that number. They tried to, so the next offer they made, then they threw depreciation on top of it, and Greg went back to him and said, you can't throw depreciation on until you come up with the final number. What they did is they estimated the rebuild costs, and then they stopped doing the estimate when they reached our total value of our insurance policy, and then they wanted to do the depreciation on top of that. And Greg told them that they had to, you got to go way past that point where we are at the full claim value or the full value of the insurance policy, and then you can depreciate that. And then I think they recognized that there was no end in sight to that number.
All right. Well, here's potentially the $1 million question that I've been screwed on. I've screwed myself on for. Let me make sure I said that right. Is I've had these buildings burned down and I get the full loss of the claim, but I was underinsured. I should have maybe had a little more. Like how I know I had one where it's like I walked away with $800,000 and I probably should have had 1.4. And it's like, oh man, I still think about that $600,000. Like, how were you? Like, do you wish you were more aggressive? All of us investors, we try to buy as little as we can because what are the chances your building's going to blow up, like all that type of stuff. But it's those moments you're like, damn, how'd that work out for you?
Well, I don't want to get into the actual numbers, but I'll just.
Were you underinsured or overinsured? Like huge.
I was. We did well. We did fine. Okay, good. We did well, but the numbers, the full policy value was based on what they wanted to write on for value of the property per square foot. It wasn't anything that I picked out. It was the number that I was shoehorned into, and the value of what they paid us out was in excess of what probably the building would have been in the fair market.
Yeah, and I asked that mostly because it triggered me, because usually people that have free and clear properties run into that issue because they don't have the lender on the back end forcing coverage. Now, maybe you had CIC. CIC has a little stricter terms, and you kept that level of coverage in all those years. But yeah,
our coverage was based on what the insurance companies wanted us to have on a per square foot basis. So gotcha. we weren't able to choose it ourselves. I mean, I would have absolutely been a little bit again, like you said. What's the chance you're going to have an incident this huge? But and I would have absolutely gone with the smaller number and regretted it.
Got it. So you get this money from the insurance, and now you did what you're the first person I've heard to do a 1033 exchange. So we've talked about 1031 exchanges several times on this show, but you pulled off a 1033, and I was like, oh, let's talk about that. It's some in-depth stuff here for our listeners.
Well, the 1033 exchange, well, I haven't pulled it off yet. Let's say I'm still working on finding the replacement property, but the 1033 exchange is I don't remember the exact term, like a casualty type situation like we had here. The IRS is giving us the opportunity to replace what was lost and we can defer the gains on that like a 1031. But the big difference is they give us 2 years to do that rather than I think normal 1031 is 12 months. And in a 1031, I think you have to do have identified your property at the time of the transaction. Whereas in the 1033, you don't have to have have it identified. And you have, well, obviously, how would you know that you're going
it
to have
makes
an incident
sense,
like
right?
that?
1031, you're making the call. 1033, that it's been forced upon you, right?
Right,
It makes sense. You have a
right.
longer runway.
Yeah. So, and there are some restrictions in place. One of the restrictions is it has to be a domestic property within the United States. It has to be a like use property. So this was a rental property. So I have to also have a residential rental property. And I'm not allowed to enter into a partnership on it, right? It has to be wholly owned by the entity, is the way I understand it. I could be mistaken on some of those points, but that's the way we're approaching it. I've read the tax code on this stuff, and it is as clear as mud. There have been challenges to it that have been taken to court. So you kind of know where you can steer through. And what you do is you declare it on your taxes, and if the IRS lets it go, then you're fine. I guess there's 7 years that after 7 years, then they can't come back at you on it. If it fails, then the portion. So if you buy, like, call it 3 buildings, if one of the 3 buildings fails, the other 2 are good. Then you're only liable for the taxes that would have been represented in the one property that you purchased and allocated towards it.
Got it. Man, good stuff. So right now you're just sitting there trying to identify that property. You have the shot clock on you, but you have some time.
Right. And so,
but it's got to be the same partnership of this original building, which makes it a little more complicated.
Yeah, and luckily for us, the partnership on this building is just me and my dad. I don't have, I do have some buildings I own with investors, but this does not happen to be one of them. So my dad and I are pretty much in lockstep in what we want to do, and it's not a big deal. But I can see how it would be a challenge if you have an unfriendly partnership. So we're in okay shape.
Man, so this has been fascinating. I mean, just genuinely curious on this whole process. And, for our listeners, we hope you don't go through something like this, but we also hope you go back and re-listen to this entire episode so you're prepared for it. So I think along those lines, like, what are some of the main things you would say to, the guys who own a couple 3 units, couple 6 units, right? Like, what are some of just pull out some of the lessons learned? Like, you can give them the 30 seconds of, the 30-second wrap up here. What can they take away? What should they be doing today to prepare themselves in case something like this were to happen?
I think it's really important to have your ducks in a row. As we started about inspections and making sure that you have everything in order, so that in the event that you do run into a situation, there isn't questions about whether you are a proper operator or not. Documenting everything. We went through a process a number of years ago. We've been in business for 35 years of making sure that we've scanned every sheet of paper that we can. Start that process early, because it's easier to find that stuff if it's filed away and in a place where you can retrieve it. And then when you run into an incident like what we had, one of our guiding lights, one of our guiding tenets through this whole thing was do what's right. We didn't have to give everybody their full month rent back for the month of September, but it just felt right to do that. Everything we did was just because we wanted to make sure that we did what was right by the community and right by the people that have entrusted us with their safety and living in our buildings. And sometimes it's hard. And it's, when you're talking about, we wrote checks for roughly $10,000. That's not an easy bunch of checks to write, but for the people that were living in those apartments was everything that they owned inside that box. I get to go home to my family in my home, and I get to be comfortable. And they don't. It's really, really important to, and I always tell my kids, and this is more about when you do something wrong, but whenever something happens, make sure you do the next right thing. And it's really important to just do the next right thing everywhere down the line. We all make mistakes. There wasn't any mistake that we made in this incident. We want to make sure that we did the right things that we could along the way.
Good stuff. Mark, anything else before we wrap this?
Oh, that's it, man. That's deep, man. I love it. Do the next right thing. Cool. Are we going through the questions now? We ready to wrap?
Let's do it.
All right. Roman, I don't know if you remember him for the first time, but you're different now. We're always a different version of ourselves from 3 years ago. So here we go. What is your competitive advantage? How have we been able to do all this while so many others wish they could?
Well, it really comes down to the family business. Something my dad built years ago, and I've been able to build off of what was presented in front of me. My sister and I are continuing this, and I think we've taken it from a very ethical standpoint wherever we can. We try not. I've always believed that I don't want to screw any of my tenants. It's just not good business. Plus, they have more time in the day to think of ways to get back at me, and I just don't want to deal with looking over my shoulder.
Dude, that's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. I love that, though. That's awesome.
What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
I think that, you can make a lot of mistakes in investing. And as long as you are able to ride out those mistakes, you will be successful. It's just time. Over time, those mistakes disappear if you're able to hang on, and you will take the keys from my buildings from my cold, dead hands.
Love it.
Insert here. Time is your asset. No, you're not going to go there. Like, man, I was making all these googly eyes at you. Like, he set you up, man.
I know. We're overdoing it.
Sorry. Time is your asset.
Until the t-shirts are released.
All right. So we asked this question during COVID, so this should be different. What do you do for fun?
Well, now that we are back to being able to travel, the family and I, we love to travel. Last year we were able to go to Europe, went to Paris and Spain. We're looking forward to a trip to the BVI's for spring break coming up. 3 years ago, my youngest was only 6. She's 9 now, and she fully embraces the travel lifestyle that we like to do when we can. When we were in Paris, she wore a beret every single day. It was ridiculous, but funny all at the same time.
That's awesome. All right. What is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Oh, I have for some reason, I love Malcolm Gladwell. He is just so fantastic. And he came out with a book, it was about a year or so ago. It's called Bomber Mafia, which was about World War II and the use of bombing in World War II to end the war. It was absolutely fascinating. It was one of those ones you sit in your driveway to listen to the end of the next chapter.
Yeah, I remember the original ones, like Tipping Point and Outlier, like those had a huge influence. I mean, this one sounds more like historical. Like this sounds like a Michael Lewis almost.
Yeah, it was fantastic. He wrote this book as an audio book. So anytime he had audio insert of the actual characters, he threw it in there. It was fascinating.
All right. We'll link to that in the show notes.
All right. Besides yourself, name one person in your local network you'd highly recommend to other Chicago investors.
Well, I'm going to name 3 because all 3 of these people were relevant to this situation they dealt with here. And first was Greg Yearwood of Precision Consulting. Without him, it would have been really, really tough to do. And I know that the insurance company would have had me. Mick Snyder, Sphere Public Relations. He works for the MBOA as their consultant. And without him, I would have looked like an absolute dope in front of the media the days of the event and the days after the event. And then Jeff Reichenbach with State Farm Insurance. Jeff crushed it. And I mean, I was terrified at the insurance rates that I was seeing after having this incident. And now that he's got me in a good place, I can kiss him as long as my wife says it's okay.
All right, awesome. Roman, this episode's been great. You've provided a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Well, right now I'm looking for 1033 exchange. I am, I am seeing the market starting to go in the direction that has me interested. I'm starting to see bank-owned properties back on, so I'm not sure if anybody's going to be selling anything at a price that would entice me. But if you do, I'd love to look at it.
And especially tell us your areas.
I'm mostly in the Austin neighborhood, but I'm really looking to add more to my portfolio in Northwest Indiana. I do have a few buildings in Blue Island, but I'm, the way the building department's headed down there, I'm on a pause of purchasing there. So Northwest Indiana or Austin, the west suburbs.
Sounds good. All brokers, start dialing. All right, Mark, who we playing for? Who's sponsoring our fact?
All right, so the sponsor today is Straight Up Chicago brokerage team. Tom and I got this brokerage team out there now. So if you guys are looking for something, maybe we can find you a 1033 there as well too. But we're gonna play today for Dragonau Testavia. Nice Irish name. Dragonoff, if myself or Roman get this question right, we get a $50 gift card brought to you by Straight Up Chicago brokerage team. All
right. So today's question. So I realized this from talking with Roman, but Galewood's actually part of the Austin community, which I thought it was its own thing, but it's part of Austin. But as a kid growing up, you go past the Mars Candy Factory there. So that's closing in 2024. And I think it's likely being donated to the community, which is awesome. For those who don't know, it's got the cool, Spanish Renaissance architecture, just real dramatic facade. It's really awesome. But when was that building constructed? And your options are 1909, 1928, 1943, or 1960. The Mars Candy Factory out in Galewood. When was that constructed? 09, 28, 43, or 60?
On Oak Park Avenue. I remember our church was on Narragansett. I used to get mad when they cut over from Narragansett from North Avenue versus taking Oak Park because we're going to drive by Mars.
Narragansett gets weird there, right? Because it curves on north and becomes Ridgeland or whatever. Then jog.
No, I'm going to go with 1943.
All right, Roman, hedge his bet here. Don't pick 43. Pick something else.
Yeah, for some reason it feels like a 20s construction, 1928, but that's a little. Yeah, I'll go with 1928.
There you go. I was gonna say stick with your gut. Way to bail Mark out here. 1928.
Oh man, Dragonoff, you win, dude. $50 gift card brought to you by Straight Up Chicago brokerage team. Oh man, I thought the building looked too new for that. But they keep, what the problem is? They keep the building look so beautiful all the time. Like their landscaping, they have people literally like visit there for the seasons or the flowers and all that stuff. It's crazy.
Wasn't it originally a golf course, a country club?
I did not know that.
I'm not sure. I for some reason I thought it was.
I make up half these facts anyway, so I'm not sure either.
All right, awesome, Roman, man. Thank you so much for time you spent 2 days with us on this. Is awesome, Tom. Thank you as always, listeners. Build your team. Go on there, check it out. We heard a State Farm rep on there today. We also have a State Farm rep on Build Your Team. Love to help you guys out in any way we can. That's why we put that together. Visit straightupchicagoinvestor.com. Build your team is a button right on the homepage. Roman, thank you. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks all.
Thank you.